certainly not least is Shanghai. So if you got all of those right, props to you. It's not an easy little game, but it's a fun one. It's better in person, so I apologize, but I like it anyway. Okay, let's get started. So today, what we will talk about is, first and foremost, we have not been living under a rock, right? International programs right now are going through a little bit of a tough time in terms of uncertainty and what's going on around the world. And so we're going to talk about that first and foremost. So let's talk about COVID considerations, right? How has that impacted our office, our programs? And then we're going to go into, then we're going to pretend like everything is fine and go into program options and application timelines and costs and financial aid information and things like that. So then we'll pretend like COVID isn't a big deal and we'll be able to travel again for the summer. And then we have a great student panel today with us who are ready to answer lots of questions. So, I want to get everybody to introduce themselves first. So we'll start with introductions. Again, I am Britta Getz. I'm the Associate Director in the Kelly International Programs Office. I actually manage the short-term programs, so the X272 program. So you may have already seen me during an info session for that, but right now I'm wearing a different hat and we're talking about summer programs. So Courtney, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
I'd love to. Yes, I'm Courtney. I'm the director of the Kelly Institute for Social Impact, or KISI. And I've been working with KISI for about 5 years now, and specifically with our international internship program for just this year. So this is still a pretty new thing to me, but it's been a lot of fun. There's some great students that go through this and really positive things that I've heard, as I'm sure you'll hear later with our panel.
And then if we could have each one of the panelists quickly introduce yourselves, just so the people who are watching have an idea of who's on the panel so they can kind of direct questions if they want to. Just a quick, Abby may not be here yet, so I know she was joining late. But Megan, do you want to introduce yourself real quick? Maybe tell us your name, your major, where you were, and maybe your internship placement. That would be great.
Yeah. Hey guys, so my name is Megan Biles. I'm currently a senior and I'm studying marketing and sales. And then last summer, so 2019, I went to Shanghai for 8 weeks, 2 months. It was a part of the CIEE. And then it was like, my experience was I had classes on Wednesdays and then an internship placement Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. So yeah, if you have any questions about Shanghai, let me know and I'll be glad to answer them.
Jack, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah. Hi, my name's Jack Gibu. I'm a senior studying finance, and I spent the summer 2019 in Paris doing the internship program. I worked for a company called Wider. It was a lot of fun. It's a great opportunity, guys. Looking forward to the questions.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. Purva?
Yeah, you're fine. You got it right.
Is that how you say it? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, you're fine. You got it right. Yeah, so my name is Apurva Gadde. I'm a junior majoring in marketing and public policy analysis. I was supposed to go to Thailand over the summer. I didn't go to Thailand, so I did a remote internship with the company I was supposed to work with in Thailand from India. So the company I was working with was Flying Squirrel Outfitters, and they were a social enterprise based in Thailand.
Awesome. Thank you. How about Caitlin?
Hi, everyone. I'm Caitlin. I'm a senior studying finance and sustainable business, and I was in Sydney for summer of 2019. So I took classes and did the internship, and it was a good time.
Great. Thank you. Dakota, do you mind introducing yourself?
Hello, I'm Dakota Caney. I'm a senior this year. I'm studying economic consulting and public policy. In 2019, the summer of that year, I went to Hong Kong with Abby Bergdorfer, who will be joining us later, I guess. I had classes in the beginning and then at the end of the internship, so it was a little separated, a little bit different from the rest of them.
Thank you. And Trinity, last but certainly not least.
Hi there, my name is Trinity, and I am a junior studying marketing and international business. And this past summer, I actually worked with a nonprofit in Peru focused on education virtually through Zoom.
Thank you. So one of the big things you may have noticed is that the KC internships were virtual. So our 2 KC representatives are juniors because they were able to do their internships last summer or this past summer. The Kelly International Programs ones, and we'll distinguish between those in a second, but the Kelly International Programs ones were from 2019 because we did not send students out on internships last summer due to COVID. Okay, so thank you so much for those introductions. If you do have any questions, go ahead and pop them into the Q&A. We are taking them at the end, so we're gonna go through the formal presentation first, and then we'll take questions and we can address the questions to the panelists. Okay, so first and foremost, let's talk COVID for a second, and then we can always, then we'll pretend like it's nothing and move on. But let's talk COVID. So as you all know, there's a lot of unknowns. There are many, many, many unknowns right now, and a lot of those are in regards to international programs. Can we travel? Right now, a lot of those answers are no. So they are known, but they're unknowns when you look into the future for many of the travel related questions. There are some things that we do know. One of the things is spring 2021 feasibility. So these are spring programs, semester programs. They have not been canceled yet. The university is planning on making a call about those in November. So that's one of the unknowns for us right now. So there's a lot of parallel planning for the juniors out there. I know you guys are sophomores, so maybe it's more certain when we get to that point for you guys. But there are some unknowns for obviously X272 and things like that for you as well. For summer though, and this is one of the things that we want to point out, the university is probably not likely to make a call about summer feasibility until February or March 2021. And so that means that while we have to start planning regardless of what happens, if we want to have the option of going and sending students out over the summer, we have to start planning now, and we have to start thinking about that and opening applications and things like that, because by the time February and March rolls around, if those aren't well on their way in terms of getting ready and getting set up, we won't be able to send students regardless. And so that's one of the pieces. That's why we're going to pretend it's not happening for a while we talk about how amazing these opportunities are and how and what the process is of getting to that point to be able to study abroad or to intern abroad. So what if we can't study abroad or intern abroad? We want to make sure that you understand that there are going to be differences in the programs this coming summer, assuming that we can send students, versus what it's been like in the past. And so a couple of those things, what they include travel restrictions. So that is the one big thing that we're seeing really front and center right now is across countries, that there are travel restrictions between countries, between neighboring countries. So in Europe, for example, you may be able to leave a country, but if a travel restriction is put into place, you wouldn't be able to come back and work on Monday. So one of the big things that we're advising students, especially for semester programs right now, is that you should plan to stay in your program's host country. For interns, that looks a little bit different usually anyway, in terms of traveling around over the summer. But that is one of the big things that we're trying to drive home as much as possible, that you really have to choose a location based on where you think you can be for 8 or 9 weeks comfortably, and you're not just using that as a bouncing or a home base in order to travel on the weekends. And so that's a big thing, regardless of whether it's semester or summer. we're asking students to parallel plan at IU. So if you're planning on doing a credit-based or credit-bearing internship, so a six credit internship, and we'll talk about the WLC in a second a little bit more. But if you're planning on doing one of those and you end up not being able to travel, you do have to parallel plan a little bit in terms of figuring out how you're going to satisfy your world languages and cultures requirement. We're telling students to delay financial commitments as much as possible. That's not quite relevant yet for this group, but it will become relevant once you apply for interning abroad. Possible quarantine on arrival. That's what we're seeing in a lot of places for students with student visas. Even though they might be able to get student visas, they will be asked to quarantine on arrival. So that's a 2-week period where you can't leave a house and or a dorm room. And so that's something that might end up becoming a reality for the semester students, but could also be a reality for this upcoming summer. And then obviously increased health precautions and guidelines. So all the providers that we work have really strict precautions and guidelines in place to make sure that everybody stays healthy during their time abroad. And so students have to abide by those, as well as then the host community's guidelines and laws and as they relate to COVID. The other big COVID consideration, and this is more of a programmatic change or a programmatic update, is that there are some options for virtual placements through, and this is KC specific. So we have not in our office started considering doing the virtual placements. And so this is one of the other considerations that if travel does not become possible, that maybe a virtual placement could be an option. And Courtney will talk about that a little bit more later. Okay, so what are the options? So in our office, and I'll turn it over to Courtney in a second to talk about KC, but in our office, we have pretty much 3 different options. Today's panel is only focusing on internships, just based on who was able to join us. But one of the options is this summer internship abroad. Most of them, or many of them, satisfy the IUB Gen Ed WLC, so the World Languages and Cultures requirement. Most of them are open to students after their 4th semester, so you guys. So you apply before you start your 4th semester, and then by the time you do the internship, you're after your 4th semester. And then there are summer study abroad programs. So those, all of those satisfy the Gen Ed World Languages and Cultures requirement because they're 6 credits and 6 weeks at least. And those are also open to 4th semester students in college. And so those offer a variety of different courses. So depending on what you're interested in, we're not going to go into the details of the different programs that are available, but there are some course-based programs as well. And then the last thing that we offer for the summer is a short-term study option. So there are a couple programs that exist that are 3 credits and I think 3 weeks. And so those are more under the purview of short-term programs than full-term or full-time summer programs, and they're course-based. So those are not internship-based either. Courtney, do you want to chime in about the KC programs?
Yes, I'd love to. So the KC summer internships are similar in that they're 8 to 10 week internship experiences. So you're matched with an organization in a different country and you're working for them. This one is not credit-based. So there's no credits offered, so won't meet any of those requirements. But you will be working full-time at an NGO or a nonprofit or a social enterprise. So you'll still be doing business skills. These are all business internships. It's just in a very different environment. So you won't be working at a large corporation or a big company. You'll be working for a local partner. These are all people that we've worked with really extensively through our office for previous years, or that we've matched with through our partner organization, MZingo, which you'll hear a little bit about later through one of our interns. So these are all also open to students after their 4th semester of college. So same criteria there. Yeah, I think that's a good summary.
Okay. One more slide on program options. So these are just laying out all the different options. As you can see, we have a good variety of programs represented through our panelists today. So if you have any questions about any of these, I'm not going to read through the list of programs, but you can take a look. Some of these, so programs have to be 6 credits to satisfy the IUB Gen Ed WLC. And so like Courtney said, the KC ones do not, and then some of ours don't either. Some of the Kelly International Programs ones don't either. So do a little bit of research. We're happy to help with that just to make sure that you're choosing the right program if that's your goal. And then for us, at least, the 2021 programs will be finalized soon. So they're not quite finalized. So that list of programs in the middle is almost final, I believe. But if you have specific questions, we can always field those individually. Okay, so how does the application work? And I'll go through this really quickly. This looks a little bit different for our programs and for KC programs. So we're going to split it apart in a couple different slides. But for the Kelly International Programs, internships and study abroad programs, you have to choose one program to apply to. So you cannot apply to multiple ones and kind of hedge your bet. You have to apply to one, and then there's an online application. So the website looks like this. There's an application button that shows up, so it's pretty easy to see. The applications open on December 1st, and they require a compelling personal statement, 1 or 2 faculty recommendations or references. Sometimes some programs require professional recommendation. So that's something that we can talk to you about if you have questions, but that's from a previous employer. And then all of the internship ones at least require a resume and then a cover letter. And that's another thing that's outlined within the application, but we're happy to talk about that before the application opens, just to give you a little bit of a heads up of what that looks like. So you can start preparing.
And then, like Britta said, the KC application process is a little bit different. So you'll actually have one application for all of the internship locations. So within that, there are some that have a language requirement. So if you don't meet that language requirement, you obviously will be able to apply for those specific internships. But for the rest of them, you can just preference all of the ones that you're interested in. So if you would be open to traveling to all 6 of those places for an internship, you can list all 6. If there is only one that you're interested in, just list the one. We'll kind of ask you for more specific details when we get to the placement part, but that one application will be covering all of those experiences. And then there are similar things required, your statement of purpose, your essay questions, your resume. Part of this application is also the funding. So we do have some KC funding for these experiences, and that application is built into this one. So when you get to that part, you can either say, yes, I would like to apply for funding and fill out some extra questions, or no, I'm good, I don't want to do that, and then you'll just add your application there. That application has the same timeline as the study abroad ones, so we'll open on December 1st as well.
Okay, so there is a program cost involved in doing an international internship or an international program. They range depending on the location and depending on the program. For the Kelly International programs, there are fee sheets available for each individual program that's offered. Those are posted within the cost and financial aid section of the website. And there are some fees that are outlined that will go on your bursar bill. And then there are some that are estimated out-of-pocket expenses. So take a look at that. If you want to look at the total estimated cost, that's available as well. And the withdrawal policies are outlined on those.
And then on the KC side of things, we have a couple of different costs listed here. As Britta mentioned earlier, our internships do have the potential of going virtual. So right now we've communicated with all of our partners, and 5 of the 6 have confirmed that they will host students whether we are there in person or there virtually. So when you accept your internship at that location, you are in it for the summer. And then whatever IU decides will affect how we handle that, but you will be working for that organization over the summer. So we have some different costs listed there based on whether you are in person or whether you're here and doing that virtually. The costs that aren't listed in there are, like Britta said, the out-of-pocket ones. So basically the travel to get there. That's the main thing. And there'll be a more specific cost breakdown because each of the locations is slightly different on the website.
And there are some scholarships available. So I recommend that you take a picture of this slide. It's a good one to have just in your back pocket, just to understand what kind of funding is available. There are some scholarships, pretty generous for the summer, some scholarships available, including some from Hutton, so from the Honors College. You don't have to be part of the Honors College, you just have to have a 3.4 GPA to apply to those, or to one of those. There are some that are within the application, like Courtney mentioned. The KC funding is available within the application, and the Kelly International Programs Study Abroad funding is available through the application as well. So take a look at that. Also, if you're going through a provider, they might have some funding, or if you're eligible for one of the DEMA scholarships, so the Diversity, Equity, and Multicultural Affairs scholarships. Those are quite nice as well for summer internships. We would recommend, I would always recommend that you apply for the annual, the Kelly Annual Scholarship, regardless of whether you're going abroad or not. So that priority deadline is usually, or is always April 1st for the coming, for the following school year, the following academic year. And so regardless of study abroad or not, you should apply to that. And then for maximum scholarship consideration, make sure you complete your FAFSA just so the university knows what your financial situation is, and so they can award you funds appropriately. Okay, so we want to go through the internship. What does an internship even look like when you're studying abroad or when you're going on one of these programs? What should you expect when you're interning abroad, right? So there's this kind of the structure, the set bullet points that we can go through, right? The 0 to 6 credits, like your internship will satisfy, or the course that's attached to the internship will satisfy a certain number of credits. It'll satisfy the WLC or not. You'll work certain number of hours while you're there. But then there's this more intangible piece that gets at the expectations. And so one thing that we try to talk about, or that we like talking about, and I want to get the panelists to answer this question in a little bit once we're at the Q&A section. But this idea of what kind of internship can you expect to get when you're abroad? And so one of the things is that for our programs, at least, it's not the type of program where you can request a specific company to work for, right? You're not going abroad to say, I want to work for E&Y or EY while I'm abroad, and now place me in that company. The way these work is that the placement coordinators, so once you apply to the program, you're connected with a placement coordinator. And so that person really starts talking to you and interviewing you about your goals, your academic, your professional goals, what you're trying to get out of an internship over the summer, an international internship. And so that really gets at the bottom of what kind of placement they might be able to find for you. And oftentimes our students have indicated preferred companies in terms of something like, I would love to work for a company like X, or I would love to be in this area or this industry. And that's a really good conversation starter for our program providers, because that gives them guidance. So it doesn't corner them, but it gives them guidance. And so that's the way we talk about sort of the placement process. The expectation is after that first conversation, or after a couple conversations, they go off and they look at their portfolio of companies and they try to make a placement that's as close to accomplishing your goals as possible. They can't guarantee a placement with a specific company, like I said, but that's what their goal is, to get you to get the most out of a placement. The other thing we talk about, and I'm going to jump around a little bit in my bullet points, but the other thing that we talk about is that this is really a study abroad program with internship components. So we like to have students look at it as a study experience. So you're going abroad to study the topic of international business abroad, and you have this unique insight into one specific company who you're working for 25 to 40 hours a week, to allow you to get a fuller picture of this idea of international business. And so we try to, instead of saying it's an internship program where you're placed in a certain company, we like to kind of flip it around and say, you know, you're studying international business and you have this unique experience. Courtney, do you want to talk about KC specifically for a second?
Yeah, so this is another point where the KC process is just a little bit different from the study abroad process. You'll actually have your placement much sooner in the process. So because we have a set number of partners that we work with routinely, you will either be paired in one of our locations that works with Mzingo. In that case, those internships are more consulting focused, and Mzingo has a list of local partners that they work with, and they'll work with you to match you with another group of students with a specific organization. So you'll know what country you're in, and you'll know that you're with Mzingo, but you won't know specifically which nonprofit you're working with until much closer to your departure date. For the other ones, we work with a specific local nonprofit. So you'll know exactly who you're going to be working with, whether that's Global Mamas in Ghana, Flying Squirrel Outfitters in Thailand, or Ninos de Guatemala in Guatemala. So you'll know your organization, and then those organizations have a variety of flexibility. So some of them want wonderful interns, and then they'll tailor their projects to the intern's skills. So if you are a marketing major, they will find you a marketing project. If you're more interested in finance, they will find you a finance project. And then we have others that say, here's the project that I have. I need a student that fits this skill. So the placement part will happen when you're doing interviews. We'll offer you a position, but we'll offer you a specific internship. So you'll know you're being offered an internship with Flying Squirrel Outfitters, and then you'll have the chance to think about that. And then once you're placed, you'll get more details on the exact kind of work that you'll be doing. It will be similar. It'll be a full-time internship, unpaid. You'll be diving in deep to their culture, both of the environment in the office and the organization, and then also more broadly. They tend to be really great at helping our interns embrace the culture of the country that they're in.
Awesome. Okay, so now I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I would love to hear, I see there's a few questions in the Q&A already. I appreciate that. I'll take a look at those as we start having our student panelists start sharing their experience a little bit, because that's why you guys are all here, to hear them talk, not to hear us talk. Maybe both. But I'm going to stop this. And so now you should be able to see everybody. If the student panelists would uncover themselves, so start your cameras. I do want to start this session just by asking you guys to chime in a little bit about that placement process, and maybe where some points of not anxiety, but ambiguity. So these processes are quite ambiguous, especially for our programs, and kind of how that program, how the placement, the internship placement went for you specifically, and how it ended up. Because you guys all said that your internships were great and were amazing. Maybe, right? It's an amazing experience, at least. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that placement process, and then we'll go into some other questions, but we can go from the questions that are being asked by attendees or questions that we have. So who would like to start?
I can go first. I think especially for sophomore year, like a lot of students have to wait until the end of the year to find internships, regardless if they're international or domestic. So it was nice for me, at least knowing like I got into the Hong Kong program, so I knew I was going to have an internship. So I felt like that released a lot of anxiety. And then just finding a company, I probably had 5 or 6 interviews, and just seeing if it was a culture fit, what kind of work I would be doing. And then at the end of the day, it kind of has to be a match. They pick you, and then ideally you pick them too. But for me, it came down to like my 5th interview, and it just felt like that would be the coolest project. And it aligned that they wanted me on their team too. So it all works out. You just have to be patient, but that's normal for sophomores anyways.
I can speak a little bit about this from like a Casey perspective. Can you guys hear me all right? Okay. So I guess from like a Kesey perspective, we were just not sure, I think, what we were gonna do with COVID and whether our programs were gonna be allowed or not. So it was like a really quick turnaround where I remember going into Courtney's office and I walked out thinking, okay, we're gonna be fine. Like this is gonna happen. And then like 3 days later, it's like this isn't happening anymore, and it's a lot of uncertainty to deal with, especially because we weren't sure back then if virtual internships were an option. I've never thought of internships as a virtual thing, but I think that what really helped was just having those resources and having Kesey resources at your support. So Courtney was really supportive. So are our partner organizations. A lot of the people that Kesey works with, they have very strong relationships with and are involved with in many different capacities. So they're always trying to be very flexible and trying to accommodate you. And I think that's something that really worked well for me. And then I also just tried to be really positive about it and see what other opportunities I could pursue in the summer while doing this internship that, maybe I couldn't have done before just because of virtual or just because it was in person. Yeah.
One thing that Britta mentioned is that they call you and they do like a little interview to try to figure out where you should go. It was super nice. The lady who was working for IES, which was the study abroad program I was through, she called. She was like asking me all these questions, what I'm interested in, what kind of is my major, and what I wanted to do. I told her all this stuff, and sadly, it didn't line up that I got exactly what I wanted because of the culture in Paris is different. You need like a really high level of education to get like the basic level jobs and what I wanted. So that was kind of interesting. But they have so many different opportunities. I ended up working at a startup. In fact, I interviewed at 2 places and both of them were startups. And honestly, the majority of the people in the program were also working in like companies that were like pretty small, but had really cool ideas. It was a good process. Oh, another thing is that I had other friends who were going abroad this summer as well, and their internships they waited till like the last day to figure out like what they were actually doing. So I know it can be a stressful process, but like Abigail said, it is lined up. You will have something, so you don't have to worry about it.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Let's see. I would love, and I'm going to go to the Q&A in a second. There are some specific things in there, but I want to get your sense of why you chose to do an international internship. What was your reasoning to choose that versus something domestic? Maybe a few of you chime in on
Take
that.
this one. Personally, for me, I didn't have a lot happening that summer, and I kind of wanted to do something a little bit off the beaten path. So it's definitely a unique experience that like Kelly offers and provides for us. And I was kind of picturing it as like no one I knew was really doing it. I thought it'd be really cool and exciting, and you have to remain super open-minded to do this program. So I felt like, especially doing this in the summer, you kind of have a leg up for recruitment too, and you just get that experience earlier on than a lot of your other classmates, which I found super beneficial down the road.
Yeah, going off of that, like obviously there's like the language credit, like how that fulfills it. So that was like the number one reason for me. But then going beyond that too, like just being able to say like, yes, you went abroad, but also you interned and took classes. Like even if the internship placement like wasn't your top like number one choice or anything, like you still got so much exposure and like being able to like pull from that experience, like it really does make you stand out like when you're recruiting and just like in general. So you can always talk about that.
I would say like kind of in the same way that this program is so much more than just an internship or just classes. It's an entire 2-month exposure to some other culture that you have never experienced before. And so it's a very unique opportunity that it's just more than your internship placement.
I would say I specifically chose to go abroad because I'm pursuing a minor in Spanish and I really wanted to practice my language abilities. And while I was working in Peru, I can definitely say I got that experience. I communicated with my boss, my coworkers, everyone in Spanish throughout the job. And I can say even if it was virtual, my fluency has gone way up after this experience.
And even though you're virtual. That's a great insight, because that's something that I was curious about. I want to address some of the questions that are in the chat. So just real quick, there's a few that are very specific. So just to reiterate, some of these are pretty technical, but just to reiterate, for the summer internship programs through the Kelly office, you do only choose one. So that's just a reiteration. And then the KESE the way the KESE programs work is that you rank the ones that you're interested in. Then for, let's see, there's a question specifically for Caitlin that I want to just raise, and this goes to, it can go to everybody, I think, in sort of slightly different ways, but it says you're a sustainable business major, is that right? Yeah. So
Yeah.
did your internship in Sydney involve any aspects of sustainability? And then going a little bit wider than that, how did your internships align with your academic goals in general? And so if you're a finance major, how did that align with your major? So
Yeah,
Caitlin, do you want to start?
Yeah, that's definitely something that I brought up in the initial interview when they kind of asked where my priorities were and what I wanted to do. And sustainability has always been a passion of mine. So I wanted to kind of get my foot in the door in that aspect. But kind of my internship where I ended up was a lot more finance oriented. But what was unique is that because you're working with such like small companies, you're able to be flexible and kind of like I kind of made my own project within my internship, and it revolved around sustainability, which is really cool because it's not something they ever looked at before, and they started implementing it day to day. So I definitely learned how to like raise my voice and do it and like say that I wanted to study sustainability, and they kind of made that work for me. At the same time, I was only just finished sophomore year, so I didn't have a lot of finance experience yet. So it definitely gave me that like finance background that I think was necessary.
I'm a finance major and I did an internship after my freshman year in finance. So I actually wanted to do something that wasn't in finance. And I ended up as a research intern, and going into consulting, it like aligned well with the type of work that I'll be doing after graduation. So I would say like you can find any type of work. It doesn't necessarily have to be aligned to your major. Again, you're going abroad because you want a variety of experiences. So that can also relate to the type of work you're doing.
I'll add sort of a KESE perspective to that and sell KESE a little maybe. But most of the KESE internships that are offered really do focus on local social enterprises or nonprofits. So there's a lot more, I guess, direct implications and social impact if that's something you're interested in. The organization that I worked with, it's called Flying Squirrel Outfitters in Thailand, and they focused on hiring local women to make sustainable and eco-friendly products. And I worked on B2B marketing for them. So there's definitely a lot of organizations that KESE works with where you can incorporate your passion for sustainability, if that helps.
That's awesome. Thank you guys for that. There's a question in the Q&As about funding and scholarships. And I would love to hear from you guys about what scholarships you took advantage of, or maybe some insight that you have in terms of funding a summer abroad. I know I can answer from our office's perspective that it's sometimes hard. It's not necessarily, you don't know all the funding that you're going to have by the time you commit to the program, which makes it a little bit harder maybe to decide. But I'd love to hear your point about funding these programs or funding your way to go abroad.
I can talk about that for a little bit. So I applied for a scholarship for I believe it's Hutton Honors International Experiences Program or something along those lines. And I did get a scholarship from them, which helped a lot. I believe it's like a one-time scholarship that you apply for throughout your 4 years for some type of international experience. And you can get a range of values in that scholarship. But that's definitely something to check into.
I also basically just followed the steps that were kind of shown in this presentation. And I remember being told that, like, when I went through it, that basically if you apply, you have a very high chance of getting a scholarship. I don't know if that's the same as it was, but I didn't find out about my scholarship until pretty, I'd say, like, in the summer. Like, you find out a little bit late, but it's very helpful to, like, kind of get that surprise in your inbox that you've got a scholarship. And I know a lot of people had that same kind of experience.
Yeah, I think that's pretty standard. The Kelly specific scholarships, and Courtney, maybe you can address this for Kesey as well, but we try to announce scholarships as before you have to commit financially. And so you have at least a little bit of knowledge about the funding that's available to you. I know HIEP, the Hutton grant, is not that way, and DEMA is the same. So it's a little bit harder to make those decisions based on what funding you might get. I do have a couple questions in the Q&A that I want to go to in terms of the language that's spoken in the country. So one is specifically for Megan, that's about learning Chinese and using that language in your program, but I think it's a wider question of going somewhere where you might not speak the language. And what challenges did you face? How did you feel about going somewhere? The question is, did you survive in those countries where you may not have spoken the language as well? So Megan, if you want to start this one off, and then maybe others can chime in.
Yeah, so actually growing up, my mom, she's Chinese, so like I went to Chinese school for a little bit. I think I stopped like maybe middle school, and then at IU I actually took Chinese again for like one semester. So like obviously I do know the language. It did help, like even in just like ordering food and like going like on the subway, like it was like the little things where it did make a difference. But there were actually like a good amount of people in my program like who did not know any Chinese, and like they still definitely did survive. But like you could also like learn it for fun, but I think it did help me just like being able to like make my way like in China. So
So I can continue on that. Sorry. I was living in Paris, and I had a lot of experience with French from like middle school all the way till high school. And then I kind of like it edged off in college. I was like, I'm kind of done with it. But then decided to study abroad. So I had to take a French class in order to be able to go study abroad. And that was super difficult because they put me in a really high level French class, which was its own thing. So you guys are agreeing, it's really difficult. But then when you get to the actual country, it's really simple. You just gotta know like a couple phrases, and then from there just kind of like you just kind of guess your way through it. But if you travel a lot to other countries as well, I always made sure I knew hello, thank you, and like sorry, like just a couple quick little phrases. So that way you could not look like I don't know, like not smart or something like that, like a foreigner. That's it. It's just more difficult when you look like that. If that makes sense.
also another thing, like relating it back to the internship experience. So when I was doing interviews with the different companies, the one that I ended up actually interning with, like their requirement was that you like did know Chinese in the language. So that like definitely helped too. And then like every day when I would go in for internship, like I would communicate with them in Chinese. So like I definitely did improve in that aspect.
Great, thank you guys. There's one thing that I want to address in the chat or in the Q&A that's relevant for everyone, I think. There's a question about Kesey and our internships being able to be done at the same time. And so I want to address that for everyone because it is something that that can be done for, you can apply to both. You can't apply to multiple of ours, and you can't, well, you can apply to multiple Kesey ones, but you could also do both of them. And we have a good relationship. We talk to each other and see how that that plays out. So you can't go on both, but you can certainly apply to both. And then there's a question about the courses that are offered. And I want you guys to address the academics a little bit, because I know that this is not KC specific, but so there's no course that's associated with the KC programs, but there are courses associated with all of the Kelly International Programs ones. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about your experience with the courses. I know in some places it's a language course and an internship seminar course. So I'd love your insight on what those courses were like, and what you got out of those courses. Anyone?
Oh, someone else would speak. No, it was honestly the courses were my favorite. They were my favorite part. For me, there was like a language course and then a leadership culture course, where essentially you learned about business culture in France and other European countries. They had speakers come in from that have worked all over Europe, Americans who have transferred over to Europe. It's a bunch of really cool stuff. We also got to do some like trips to like really big companies, like specifically Euronext, which is like the European stock exchange. But no, it's an awesome course. You get to learn a lot about yourself, especially different leadership styles, and when you are working in a culture that's completely different, you really get to see the different the ways that things work together. If that's a simple way of putting it.
This is sort of like not relevant, but also a little relevant at the same time. So because I did my internship online virtually through FSO, and it was a smaller company, so the founder was just super flexible with everything. I actually got to finish I-Corps online while doing my internship, which I would not have been able to do if it was in person. So with the KC internships, if you do end up getting a virtual placement, there's always that option of trying to get some credits out of the way while taking them over the summer or something like that, if that's something you're considering.
So my experience was very similar to Jack. So it was like we would go on field trips. We had speakers too. It was like all very fun. Like when you say classic, you would like typically think of like a boring like required thing, but it was always like really nice. Mine was on Wednesday, so only once a week, and then the other days are just internship. But it was helpful because it was like you would like analyze the different culture, but then also like it was just like every week there were different topics, so it was never boring. Like it was like I actually got a lot from the class. So.
Awesome. Thank you guys for sharing that. I would love, since we have so many seniors on the call, I think this is a good question regarding, because some of you studied abroad. Did anybody study abroad for a semester as well? I know Abby did, and she had to leave again. Okay, so, oh, Dakota, you did.
Yes, I like last
Awesome.
semester.
Yeah, did you, so the question is about sort of the idea of doing a workshop as well as a study abroad semester. I don't know if you have any experience with that. No, do you know, or can anybody address that? Somebody who's done a workshop, maybe from afar or something, like the enrollment piece might be difficult, so we might have to address that offline. But I think this idea of doing something, of studying abroad and at the same time being engaged here or involved here, I don't know if you guys can address that. It's a big question, and maybe it's just something we'll address offline. Jack?
Take a stab at it. I would say just if you are in a weird situation like that, you just got to keep reaching out to the person in charge of the workshop. Like when I was applying to the Paris program, I wasn't technically eligible, so I just kept shooting out emails to everyone, and eventually it worked out. So if you just keep pushing, keep shooting out those emails, I'm sure they'll make an exception for you. Like a lot of organizations will. So I don't think it should be something you're worried about too much.
I guess the same thing with, there's another question about a sophomore leadership opportunity that I saw in the Q&A. I guess it's the same thing that Jack's mentioning, that you may not be able, you probably wouldn't be able to do both unless they're both virtual, right? But it's such a big time commitment that it is something where you would have to choose one or the other. There are two questions in here that that I can answer, and I want to take a minute. Well, this idea of doing two things. One of them is the X272 program for everyone, and one of these internships. And so we have seen that many times that students go on an X272 trip or a study tour, and then they do one of these internship options abroad. And so we have seen that a lot. It takes a little bit extra planning. So just let our office know if that's what you're interested in, but that certainly happens. And then this one question is about cancellation, so COVID related. The answer right now is I don't know. So the question is, can some programs be canceled while others still go? That's a great question, and I wish I knew. There, in the past couple of terms, so the spring semester, we had to bring students home, but then summer and fall, the university has made a sweeping call on all programs. So a worldwide travel ban, I guess, so across the university. Right now, the world is slowly opening back up to US citizens. There are a few more glimmers of hope around the world in terms of where we might be able to go. I don't know how that translates into what the university is going to do yet. So we should know for spring, and like I said at the beginning, we should know for spring in November, and then for summer, I'm thinking February or March that we'll have a better idea. And I don't know if that's one program, one-offs, or if it's the whole thing, if one might get canceled or if everything might get canceled.
Britta, can I jump in real quick and ask that previous question about the X272 and internship combo? And just, I know Britta mentioned earlier, but KC works really closely with the International Programs Office. So know that those are, if you do a KC internship and then an X272, those are two different offices. So it may be harder, but we do try to coordinate that and make that as easy as possible. And I think, Trinity, you were actually planning to do that this summer. Is that right?
Yes, bummer it didn't work out, but this summer I would have been traveling to Peru with a X272 trip, backpacking for a week on my own, and then heading over and doing my internship for another 8 weeks. The program changed a lot when it moved virtually, but it was still a great experience and would definitely be possible for people in the future to organize their X272.
I can talk a little bit, about that.
Go for it, Dakota. No, perfect.
Part of the reason I chose Hong Kong was because I did X272 in China. And so a part of the fees for X272 was the flights. And so I was able to defer my flight back home after Hong Kong. So I didn't have to pay for double the amount of flights. It just worked out perfectly. I traveled Japan and South Korea with some friends in between the two programs, and it worked out perfectly.
We have seen that a lot, so I appreciate you guys sharing those specific experiences. We've had students in Greece do an internship in Dublin for the summer, so we've seen a lot of that if it happens to line up. So one of the last questions is about the X272 program again, and I can take that. And then I want to be mindful of time because I think we're done at 5. But I think the X272 program applications are obviously closed. So we should be communicating acceptances for those if you applied by the beginning of October, or like mid-October. That's kind of the goal. So we should be getting those out to anybody who applied fairly soon. It feels like it's a huge amount of work right now, but those should be coming out soon. But I want to take the last minute to thank all of our panelists for joining today. Thank you. I guess that's big thank you to everyone and for sharing your experiences. I know we had like 10 more questions prepared to answer or to ask you guys that I'm sure you guys would have been happy to answer. And I know, right?